Romani was used by no-Gypsy people as a sort of strange jargon. No, I think as I also have made in my research on ancient languages is to discover a forgery. This is the very first document. This list of words by Ignasi-Xavier Adiego was published very recently, and this was very important for me to begin my research on Spanish Romani.
Welcome to Conversations with Romani Linguists. My name is Anastasiia. I'm an educational influencer and promoter of the Romani language.
And my name is Yaron. I'm a linguist, and I specialize in the study of the Romani language.
In this series of interviews, we talk to linguists working on the Romani language. We are eager to know how they became interested in specialized research on the Romani language, what challenges they faced on their professional path, and what fascinating stories and discoveries they had working on the Romani language. Today we are pleased to introduce our guest, Ignasi-Xavier Adiego. Ignasi-Xavier Adiego is a professor of Indo-European linguistics at the University of Barcelona and director of the Institute of the Ancient Near East, University of Barcelona. Ignasi, you're very welcome to our podcast.
No, it's a pleasure for me to be here and to speak about myself and my research.
Thank you very much for agreeing to join us and to share your experience working on the Romani language. We are sure it's going to be exciting discussion. And let's start with our we could say tradition. Let's speak about your childhood, about your background. Could you tell us, please, where you grew up and perhaps some interesting stories or what memories you have from your time being at school?
Okay, first of all, I must apologize for my English because I never studied English, and I learned English only with some books and also reading scientific publications. So I have an English is a very written English, but not a spoken English. And the memories of my childhood are very happy. I was born in Barcelona and I grew up also in Barcelona. And from a personal and familiar point of view, it was a very, very happy childhood. But also it was a childhood that coincided with the last years of Franco dictatorship. And I also remember the climate, the political climate. It was, I was a child, but it was evident that the system was not a free regime, but a dictatorship. And I remember, for instance, the need for silence, to be silent, because the political opinions were not permitted outside. My father was very, very critical against Franco regime, but only inside home. And also, I remember also the power, the personal power of Franco, because Franco was absolutely unquestionable. I remember these conversations of my father with his friends, where the typical question was, what will happen when Franco will die? And it was assumed that Franco was absolutely impossible to take out of the power. This is a very curious memory I have there of these times. But in general, my childhood was happy, and I studied I have interest for letters when I was very, very small, for literature and language, grammar, and this was my way to the research.
Oh, very interesting. So actually your favorite subject was literature, as I understand correctly.
Yes, literature and language also, the Spanish language, because in the school we we studied Spanish, not Catalan. Catalan was also forbidden in these first years. And I remember that was my favorite classes. Also to write. This was my favorite classes.
It's interesting. And what languages did you speak in your family? Or language or languages?
In my core family, with my parents and my brother and my sisters, the language was Spanish, Castilian. But in some part of my family, also Catalan was spoken. And now in my with my daughters, I speak Catalan. And I learned Catalan not in the first years of my life because I was monolingual. My mother tongue was Spanish, but after the the death of Franco, it was Catalan was introduced in the school, and in the secondary school, I could learn Catalan.
But language of the instruction at school was
in the school in the first years it was French, not English. This is one of the typical elements of many people here in Spain that of my generation that we learn French, not English, and I have learned other languages, classical languages, obviously, because I studied classical philology. But I can speak French, a little English, also Italian, Catalan, Spanish. I have learned German many years ago, but I have I don't remember. I can read German, scientific German, but I cannot speak fluently this language.
It's interesting.
I find it interesting that you grew up, you said monolingual initially at home.
Yes.
Spanish, but you decided to speak Catalan to your daughters at home.
Yes, this is a curious process because in fact, one the older of my daughters went to the school, to the nursery, and she began to speak Catalan, and she began to speak Catalan to us, to the parents. And finally, we changed the language with her, and this became the official language of communication between my wife and I. We speak Spanish, no, but with our daughters we speak Catalan. This is a situation of continuous bilingual, continuous code switching in my family. Yes. But it's not so strange in Catalonia. This situation in which a person speaks in Catalan with this person, but in Spanish with other persons, and also in some cases, my mother, for instance, speak Catalan with some persons, but they respond in Spanish. It's crazy, no? But it is very frequent, this situation of continuous interchange of languages.
But anyway, you were interested in language, in letters, in literature, in languages, yeah?
Yes.
And do you remember what was your dream job when you were a child? Was it connected somehow with languages?
No, I remember that I have some time of some years of my life of child. I was very interested for Sherlock Holmes and detective, and I think there is a relationship with my research, because my research is for me is very similar to Sherlock Holmes' work. But it was perhaps the only thing I think as a possible job when I was a child. You know? Also, I studied music also, and I played piano, and I have. But my interest was very clear for the study of language and literature and letters, no? And humanities. For me, the study, the course of the life of a student was to better each time, because the first years you must study many courses that have no interest for me. the science. I was not very good in the study of maths, and when I went to the studies in secondary school, I could choose the letter itinerary, the letter specialty letters, and it was fantastic. And also, finally, in the university, I could leave out all these courses that were not so interesting for me, and also to leave left out the gymnastics. I hate I hated gymnastics, no, and I think that the best years of my student life were the years in the university, because I could study my vocational interest. I could study Latin, Greek, and it was wonderful to leave some courses that were not interesting, and to study only what I really loved, Latin, particularly Latin or Greek or Indo-European languages.
Very interesting. Actually, we are colleagues, because I love Sherlock Holmes as well. From from the time I remember myself when I started to read, I also like Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, and even this week I decided that I would like to read or to watch something like. For entertainment, and I was thinking about what I'd like to read or to watch, and I was thinking about perhaps Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
Yeah, even
I think because I think a point in common with Sherlock Holmes and with the idea of Conan Doyle about Sherlock Holmes is that the important is not so. It's important to resolve the mysteries, the cases, but the pleasure to to find a good solution, it's more important, I think, for Sherlock Holmes. You can give an elegant explanation of the things, and this is, I think, our task as researcher also, to find a good solution, an elegant solution for the mysteries, for the no. Obviously, we have no. There is no killing kings in our task, but I think this is the same idea of Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, don't you think that the learning languages, it's a kind of mystery as well?
Yeah, it is true. Yes, and I have my specialty are fragmentary languages, ancient fragmentary languages, and this is also a task of discovering new things, new inscriptions, new texts, and also to decipher these texts. This is very similar. Okay.
Wow, interesting. Okay, and continue speaking about the mystery. Some people think that Romani is also like a secret language, like a mystery. And what about you? How did you get interested in Romani? Perhaps your first encounter with this language?
This was, I think it's interesting because it was by chance. I had some interest, but it was a particular interest, not a research interest, on Spanish jargon, argot or Germania. This is the jargon, and I had some dictionaries, and in these dictionaries, some words were presented as coming from Romani, from Gypsy, calo in Spanish, Gypsy. But this was a curiosity, but I have not deep in this aspect. But I think in the 90s, someday I was in a department store. In El Corte Inglés, is like Harrods in London or Lafayette in Paris, and there is a book department, and there was a section with cheap books, with offer books, and one of the books was this book. This is the Diccionario Gitano. This is absolutely destroyed by the use, and this dictionary was very, very cheap, no? And I had curiosity for this book, and I bought it.
When was it? When was it published?
It was published in 1980, 1991, I think. But later I realized that this was only a copy of earlier dictionaries, and it was not very reliable. It was as many Spanish gypsy dictionaries. But at that moment, it was very interesting because this dictionary, in fact, contains two dictionaries. It's strange because the title is in singular, but
What do you mean?
this dictionary has a jargon dictionary, a typical jargon, Spanish jargon dictionary, but also a Spanish gypsy dictionary. And I realized that these were two different things, and this was very, very surprising to me to discover that in fact there was a dictionary of only gypsy, Spanish gypsy language. And I tried to understand because where these words come from, because this dictionary is presents thousands of gypsy or alleged gypsy words. And some months later, I bought a dictionary of Romani, the dictionary by Jos Calvé, the dictionary of Calderache Romani. It's a very serious dictionary. I began to compare forms. This is not original research because August Pott and Miklosic and the great founders of the Romani linguistics had made this task, this work, but it was as a hobby to compare forms, no? And as I am a very obsessive person, when I find a topic, I become absolutely obsessive in finding the bibliography, the references, etc. I began to look for Romani publications, dictionaries, etc., particularly Spanish Romani, Spanish Gypsy, or Catalan Gypsy. And there are two very important books for me in this moment of research. One was a book by Carlos Claveria. It was a book published in 1950, I think. I think this is this book.
Can you show us?
Yes, this is the book. It's not very. This is a very
nice.
Perhaps it is better here. This is Estudios sobre los gitanismos del español. It's a book of 1951. And this is a very interesting book because it's a study of gypsy loanwords in Spanish. It's a very philological study. I think that Claveria did not know very well Romani, but he was working in Switzerland, and he had access to a very good bibliography. The bibliographical references in this book are fantastic. He knew all the collection of the Journal of Gypsy Lore Society, for instance. He also had access to the book on the dialect of Tychon, the book of Samson, etc. This is a very, very good source of bibliography. And this was very important for me to begin my research on Spanish Romani. And the other book, also interesting for me, was this other. This by Joan Viñolas, Vocabulari de l'argot de la delinqüència. It's a dictionary of Catalan jargon. And in Catalan jargon, we have also some words coming from Romani, but it was very interesting because this book does not have a study of Caló, of Catalan Romani, but it does have a very good bibliography about Catalan Caló, Catalan Romani. This is a very, very interesting, a very difficult to find. Now it is very easy to find a reference, but in the 90s, without internet or internet in its beginnings, it was very difficult to find bibliography about this kind of topics. No? And these two books were a very good introduction to my research in Romani. And I become to work in this
Very
question.
interesting. I heard that actually I didn't check it. I unfortunately had no opportunity, but I heard that in Spain some Roma, if I'm not mistaken, Calo ethnicity group, they you could say like lost their language. Actually, they don't speak Romani anymore. What can you say about that? Is it true or?
This is the Spanish and Catalan and the Iberian gypsies. These gypsies that come to Spain in the I think it's in the 1915 at the beginnings of 1915 no, yes.
You mean the 15th century?
In the 15th century, yes, I guess. In the 15th century, these communities now speak the rests of Caló, Catalan Calós, and that Caló is, or the Calós, the different Calós, are para-Romani varieties of Romani. This is a mixed language with grammar from Catalan or Spanish or Basque, but in the lexicon, the vocabulary is Romani. And this is the situation, I think, in the last century. It was on the two last century in the case of Spanish Romani. The Romani was a para-Romani, was as the case of English Romani, Anglo-Romani is very similar. But nowadays the situation is very, very bad because these dialects are practically not spoken by the Spanish gypsies. There is a certain knowledge of vocabulary, or very limited knowledge of vocabulary. I think that the great part of this vocabulary is lost, absolutely. And you can, and there is a passive knowledge of Romani, of para-Romani dialect. The Spanish gypsies can give some words, can give some sentences, but they are unable to speak Romani or Caló or Spanish Romani, Catalan Romani in a spontaneous way, in a continuous way. This is the idea in principle. Or in some cases, they must take a lot of borrowings from Spanish or from Catalan, etc. I think it is very difficult to have a conversation in Spanish Romani or in Catalan Romani. This is my opinion from the informations I can obtain from these people.
Thank you for clarification. And we are curious to know more about your research, which you had working on Romani, and now it's the floor for Yaron, please.
Thanks. We'll come back to Sherlock Holmes in just a moment, because there is among the many studies that you did that you have already addressed, that you approach them sometimes like a mystery to be solved. There's one in particular that actually does involve a trickster, a forgerer, and so on. So I'd like to come back to that in a moment, but we'll keep our listeners in suspense unless they want to scroll forward for just a few minutes and go back to your job title and the main area of your frame of your research, which is Indo-European languages, ancient and modern. And I think many people are familiar with the concept of Indo-European, and they associate with it a geographical concept, in particular, stretching from India all the way to Europe. And people know that there are, a group of languages that are also related, that are spoken across this area. And some people will be aware that within this area, there are also some languages that are not Indo-European, such as Basque and such as Hungarian. but by and large, that the Indo-European geographical area covers languages that are related. When we talk about Romani, the term Indo-European for some people takes on a whole new meaning, because it's a language that actually came from India and is now spoken, related to the languages of India, but is now spoken in Europe. So how do we reconcile those two concepts of Indo-European? Maybe tell us just a little bit, where does Romani fit in the broader picture of Indo-European languages?
Yes, obviously, Romani is an Indo-European language as English or as Spanish and or Catalan or German, etc. This is a language that belongs to this great family. And the term Indo in Indo-European is only an allusion to the fact that the idea that this group of languages that come from an ancient language, unique, original language, not attested language, Indo-European, was spoken in India and also in Europe. This is the reason for Indo-European as a term is also in Germany. It is preferred the reference to Indo-Germanic, Indo-Germanish, and it is the same idea of this West and East. No, this is but it is not it's a reductionist terminology, because Indo-European is not only Indian and European. Iranian languages are also Indo-European, etc. No? In the case of Romani, the exact classification is as Indian or Indo-Aryan. Also, this is the official terminology in linguistics, no? Indo-Aryan language. No, this is a language. Obviously, this is the brother or the sister of Hindi and Punjabi or Bengali or other Indian languages. The particularity of Romani is that it is spoken not in India, but in the rest of the world. No, but we know, and the evidence is linguistic. It's a linguistic evidence that Romani comes from India. This is clearly for us. I think in recent work about genetics of population genetics, etc., perhaps we can confirm this connection of Gypsy people with India. But the arguments for us are purely linguistic. The constatation that Romani is an other Indian dialect with the lexicon and also the grammar. It can be easily compared with the rest of Indian languages, and also with Sanskrit, the classical language of the India, that has a role in regarding these languages as Latin regarding Romance languages. Sanskrit is for Romani or for Hindi or for Bengali, the same as for us is Latin regarding Spanish, French, Catalan, Italian, etc.
Well, that's an important point, because we sometimes hear in popular depictions that people say that Romani derives from Sanskrit. How accurate is that as a depiction?
It is clear. Romani comes from this this called Prakrit dialects or Prakrit varieties. That is the evolution of Sanskrit, but we cannot speak of an unified Sanskrit. But Sanskrit perhaps show we now Sanskrit. Thanks to the written texts, that it is a standard language, a fixed language. Obviously, the reality was very probably more plural, but it is clear that Sanskrit or these Sanskrit varieties suffered an evolution that derived in other state of evolution, the Prakrit dialects. And Romani is one of the subsequent evolution of these Prakrit dialects. Technically, we can accept that Romani comes from Sanskrit, because we can make a sort of comparative linguistics with Sanskrit in the same measure that we can make the same study on Romance languages as Italian, French, etc., with Latin. Also with Indo-European, because the linguistic comparison is possible at different levels.
Mhm. So, but like Latin, Sanskrit is a written language, so it's the oldest written record of
Yes.
the Indic language family. So it's for
Yes.
us
Yes,
methodological.
I think that the comparison is I think is useful. No, it is not exact comparison between Sanskrit, Latin, Romani, Spanish, French, but I think this is very similar situation in order to understand this relationship between the mother language and the daughter languages.
So it provides us with an oldest possible point of reference that we can
Yes,
compare
yeah.
with. But there were many evolutionary stages in between. It's not as though that
Yes.
all of a sudden turned into Romani.
In fact, properly, the comparison of Romani must be with the Prakrit level, Pali, etc. This level, this intermediate level of evolution, because Sanskrit is too old, is too archaic compared to Romani.
Okay, so let's stay with this idea of comparing with texts because for Latin we have, the late Latin, medieval Latin, and then we have the early forms of the modern Romance languages like Old French and so on, and then the modern forms. So in some respect we have a certain continuity. And then you said the parallel is with the Prakrits, but the Prakrits are also very old. They're like first millennium, right? Or medieval times at the latest. And then we have a big gap because Romani people didn't write their language.
Mhm.
And very few people, outsiders, had an interest and wrote their language for them. And until fairly recently, I mean, in fact, just the last few decades, Romani people did not write in their language. Either they were not allowed to, or they didn't have the opportunity, or they had no interest. And so proliferation, I mean, now, as of a few months ago, we have Romani on Google Translate. And that means that there's a huge corpus of digital texts. We have translations. We have sometimes Romani being used experimentally, at least in schools, and so on. But that's very recent. But we do know a little bit about the history of Romani from texts, but those were texts that were written by outsiders, right? People who took an interest in Romani, and they took down various specimens, and that evolved over time. And you're very much a specialist in that particular area, among other areas. You looked extensively, or as to quote you from just a moment ago, obsessively. You used the term about yourself. I would say diligently, diligently and meticulously. You looked at the history of those people who wrote about Romani and took down specimens. And that gives us a little bit of an insight into the history of the language. Can you tell us a little bit about that? So when does that start? When do people start taking an interest, as far as we know, publishing about Romani? And what do we learn? What kind of people were they? Why were they interested in Romani? And what can we learn from these texts that they published?
Yes, the first written documents of Romani are of the beginnings of the 15th century, no, 16th century, excuse me.
The 1500s, yeah.
Exactly,
1500s.
16th century. And we must distinguish between manuscript documents and published documents, because we have very few documents of the first centuries of written documents of Romani. It is not is at the end of the 18th century, and particularly from the 19th century on, we find the eclosion of these documents on Romani, but the previous phase was very scarce, scarcely documented. Romani was very scarcely documented. And we must distinguish between some manuscripts, because these manuscripts remained during many centuries absolutely unknown for the researchers. For instance, the very first document, this list of works by Johannes X. Graphing was published very recently. And also I find the manuscript. I found the manuscript of Marquès de Sentmenat. It was also published some years ago. It is not, and I think that it is very heterogeneous, the interest. For instance, the case de Sentmenat was interested, I think, in the origin of the alphabet, and he reads a book, the book of Vulcanius, about this problem, because Vulcanius wrote a book about the gods and the origin of the script of the gods, etc. And Vulcanius also dedicated a part of his book to explain some words in Romani, and I think this was the interest for Sentmenat to connect this list of words with his own experience with some gypsies in Catalonia. But so I think it is very different cases, and in other cases, it is true that it was an repressive interest for Romani. It is important. Some of the first documents of Romani are clearly linked to the persecution of Romani. For instance, one of the first list of Romani words in Spain is Guirigay de Gitanos, and it was found in a manuscript with very different. It's only a page with some words. And in recent years, I discovered that this manuscript was written or was property of a judge a Spanish judge that obviously was in charge of persecuting delinquency and also marginal persons, etc. I think this is a good explanation for some of the ancient sources of Romani. In other cases, it's only an interest, a linguistic interest, or a ethnological or ethnographic interest. In the case of Graphing, I think that Graphing was working on astronomy, and some of the words in the list by Graphing are the horoscope signs, no? Because I think he associated gypsy people with the horoscope, and I think this connection explains why he was interested on Romani. I think this is very heterogeneous, the interest, and this is in some cases this is a legal or persecutory reason in some cases.
So how does one find a manuscript like that? You said you found that manuscript by Sentmenat that was not known and was not published. How did you find it? Where did you go looking, and what were you looking for?
It was also a matter of chance. There is a person that worked in the Biblioteca of Catalonia, this Biblioteca de Catalunya, the Catalonian library, and this person was Ana Gudayol. She had studied classic philology, Romance philology, and she knew me, and she was working in the library, and I think she noted the presence of this possible Romani dictionary in this manuscript. The authorship was not known. I defended later that the authorship was by Sentmenat, but in this moment it was an anonymous manuscript with very different things, and one of the things was there is a Maltese vocabulary, also by the hand of Sentmenat, and also this Romani vocabulary and sentences. And she informed me of the existence of this possible gypsy dictionary, and obviously when I discovered, I see this.
What was it labeled?
This document.
What was it labeled as in the text? What did he call that portion of the text? How did she know to suspect that it might be Romani?
How
how did your colleague who found the woman
Yes,
who
I don't know. It is very strange because I don't know why. This is a question I have no under I have not understood very well because this manuscript was also known by a colleague of my university, Professor Del Olmo, who noted the presence of this Maltese dictionary, but he did not say anything about this gypsy dictionary, gypsy words, no. But I think that I don't know. I found the dictionary, but it is true that some person earlier was able to identify as Romani or Gypsy this vocabulary.
and the author himself, does he have a heading or does he a label? Does he refer to it? Because you said Gypsy Dictionary. Does he call it that, or does he
No,
just have
no,
the
no,
words?
no.
Oh,
The
there's no
dictionary,
label.
no. It's the manuscript is a typical is an adventitious manuscript with different forms, different texts. Many of them with the same hand, and the hand identified this hand as the hand of the Marquis of Semenat. And in the case of the pages that contain this vocabulary, no, there is no heading. It's only the equivalences of the forms in Romani and in Spanish, and also there is a comparison with the lexicon of Vulcanius. Made by another hand. In the last page, a person noted some similar forms between the lexicon of Vulcanius and the lexicon collected here.
And what's the date of the Semenat manuscript?
I think this is around 1750. 1750.
So that was a time when Romani was still spoken, presumably as an everyday language in
Yes,
Catalonia.
and yes. Is the time is the dates of the Gran Redada. Is the great persecution of gypsies in Spain. This is a success that this is an event that happened in I think in 1780 no 1748 I think was this is I think this the same time of this persecution. This was a terrible persecution because all the Spanish gypsies were closed, imprisoned with the intention of exterminating. This was a very hard persecution of gypsies. And in this moment, Romani was speaking by Spanish gypsies. It is clear. And I think that after this strong persecution, perhaps the use began to disappear.
So let's stay with that for a moment because it connects us to a point that you were making before about Callot and the state of knowledge of Romani vocabulary present day among the population of Gitanos or Calots in the Iberian Peninsula as a whole. What do we know about the beginnings of Romani in the Iberian Peninsula? How many texts are there and from what times that document Romani as it was spoken in the Iberian Peninsula until this wave of persecution began or shortly afterwards? How many sources do we have about that?
The earliest sources are very scarce. The first document is a text in Romani, very difficult to interpret in a play, in a theater play in auto, and a gypsy person speaks in Romani with some words that we can identify as Romani. This is a text from the second half of the 16th century. And after this document, we must go to the 18th century, to Semenat, and also to this word list of the Guirigay de Gitanos. And in this moment, it begins the documentation, bigger documentation of Spanish Romani. This is Spanish Romani, and at the end of the 18th century, beginnings of the 19th century, we have the vocabulary of José Antonio Conde. This is one of the most important documents of written Spanish Romani, and some years later we have it begins the publication of dictionaries, also dictionary of George Borrow, for instance, also the typical Spanish gypsy dictionaries of Trujillo, Jimenez, etc. And it is these dictionaries are copied each from other. This is and also from Borrow in some cases. And this is previous to this 19th century, the documentation is very, very scarce. And in the case of Catalan, also we have the Semmenatis, perhaps is more Catalan Romani than Spanish Romani, but it is not clear. But the documentation of Catalan Romani begins in the 19th century. In the 19th century, so in the first years, we have some documents collected by Bataillard, and also we have the work by Jobert de Réart in the 1830 approximately, and this is the beginning of the documentation. In Catalan, the documentation is not so big than in Spanish Romani, but it is more reliable, I think, because the documentation in Spanish Romani is Romani was used by no gypsy people as a sort of strange jargon, no? And it introduced a lot of false words, of inventions or mixtifications, and this makes very difficult to separate the true Spanish Romani from the falsified or mixtified Spanish Romani.
Yeah, so we have several methodological problems. One problem is that one person copies from another, so we don't really know what's authentic and what's new. Another is this mixture between Romani and the secret jargons that other people used, as you mentioned. But another surely is that if mainly what we have is vocabularies, then for that point in time, we don't really know whether it represents something that you called before para-Romani, so the use of Romani vocabulary in Spanish or Catalan or Basque conversation, or whether this is a dictionary of a language that was an everyday language with its grammar and everything. So do we know approximately when Romani as a spoken language with grammar and everything, when that died out? You suggested before that it might have been a consequence of this wave of persecution in the first half of the 18th century. How certain are we about that?
The only evidence, but it is not a complete evidence, for a Romani, not para-Romani, but Romani, but pure Romani with its grammar attested in Spain is Semmenat's vocabulary, because it contains also some examples of sentences. It is true that we cannot recognize easily the use of for instance, of the nominal declension. It's not easy to identify, but it seems to be a Romani. At least the verb is inflected as in pure Romani, not in para-Romani, and it is the case of in the case of Spanish or Iberian Romani. This is the only clear evidence, perhaps together with some sentences or in Bataillard's Catalan Romani collected in the south of France, because I can identify. I have not published this this information, but I could identify a sentence where it is in pure Romani, and also in the case of Catalan Romani attested in the 19th century, in the 30s of the 19th century by Jobert de Réart, we can observe that verbal declension is conserved, is already conserved. But the nominal declension is not conserved. Nominal declension is replaced by the use of Catalan prepositions. but the verbal declension, verbal conjugation is perfectly conserved.
So that means that when we talk about so-called pure Romani, there is also a continuum. You know, sometimes things are preserved, but due to contact, there are also changes.
Yes. It is interesting because in the case of Spanish Romani, we have the impression of a sudden change, a sudden substitution of grammar. But in the case of Catalan Romani, we can observe, perhaps because we have photos, different photos of the evolution, but the continuity seems to be clear, but it is not so clear, so demonstrable, this continuity of the documents. No? But in the case of Catalan Romani, if we make a sort of continuity of the documentation, we have the impression that the change was not a sudden change, but it was a progressive change. This is my impression, but it is not so easy to affirm, because it is very probable that in the same time, and also in very close communities, inflected Romani was coexisting with para-Romani. Why not? It is very possible, because I think that the level of knowledge of Romani was different among also inside the communities.
Right. So we have that kind of suggestion from the mid-19th century from England as well. Martin Crofton.
Yes.
They document both dialects, what they call the old dialect and the new dialect.
Yes. Also in Conde, in Spanish Romani, we have this difference between the old gypsies speaking old Romani and the most recent Romani.
So, and of course, when you said photos before, you meant metaphorically. So, of course, people didn't take photos, but you mean like snapshots of different
yes.
history. And that's very interesting, because even though, so Romani people didn't write their language, so we don't have a philology of Romani that looks at Romani authors over history, but there were so many contributions by other people who took an interest that it allows us a little bit to reconstruct at least tentatively, various stages in the language and its development. And I just have one more question on that before we move to our mystery detective story to conclude this part. Thinking back of the array of different sources and manuscripts that document Romani in those centuries, so roughly between, you said, the 16th and the 19th century, all across Europe, you mentioned there were different motivations and different reasons and different levels of accuracy. To what extent can we look back at those texts, and to what extent do they give us a picture of dialect diversity in Romani already at that point in time? Because we know, of course, today that there are different dialects of Romani spoken in different parts of Europe. Do we get a sense of dialect diversity during that period already through these texts?
It is not easy. You know, the problem, for instance, with the Vulcanius vocabulary, it is not easy to establish really what was the dialect. In other cases, in the documents of the 18th century, it's easier to identify some elements, particularly, for instance, in the documents attested in Germany, where we can identify some elements of this tendency. In the case of, I obviously when I wrote this chapter for the handbook you edited with Tesner, I consider this problem, but I am not a specialist on dialectology, and also I followed your own ideas about some of these documents, because I realized that it was very difficult to establish these particularities in this very fragmentary documentation, and very ancient and very ambiguous. Many times the spellings are ambiguous also, and it is difficult to identify the forms correctly. And in the case of Spanish Romani, obviously, leaving aside the first document is oldest and very too old, but in the documentation from the 18th century on, we find this continuity. The dialect is clearly Iberian Romani with some lexical elements typical for Spanish Romani or Iberian Romani, and also some elements are recognizable as traits of this dialect of the other peripheric dialects. For instance, the kero suffix used for derivation, or some other elements in the vocabulary that points to a clear dialectal situation of Iberian Romani as a north dialect. This was the old terminology. I think this is not very exact, but it is a peripheric dialect as Anglo-Romani, or also the Romani dialects in Italy. This is the more peripheric dialects share some elements, and also other elements that are typical for Iberian Romani, as the palatalization of T or other phenomena.
Yeah, so you've been very cautious about it, and you've hedged it, but the answer is from you, I gather, yes, we can find certain dialect particularities, but we have to look very hard, and you're giving us an idea of just how many skills are involved in processing this rather modest corpus of texts, but it can give us so much insight into the history of the language, and so also the social history of the people, because to some extent, the influences that we find from other languages, of course, they suggest certain things about the relations between the Roma and the populations amongst whom they've lived. So let's come now to our mystery story, our detective story. And that is obviously the story of the Lord's Prayer in Romani from 1622, published by or attributed to Jean-Baptiste Gramai von Antwerpen, in a big work called Oratio Dominica, and I believe it's got even a longer title. Tell us the story of that text, where you found it, how you got interested, and what you discovered about it.
No, this text was published, I think, by Peter Bakker. No, Peter Bakker presented this text as a possible new document of this older period of Romani. And in fact, what I made was, I think, as I also have made in my research on ancient languages, is to discover a forgery. And I can quote a parallel. Some years ago, I received an ostracon. Ostracon is a fragment of a piece of pottery used for writing. Was very typical in ancient world, in Greece, for instance, to recycle these fragments of pottery to read, for reading. And one of these ostraca was very mysterious, also was very strange, and it was sent to me in order to identify the script, because I made my doctoral dissertation about Carian. This is a very strange alphabet, and when a strange text with a strange alphabet appears, it is always I am asked by the possibility of Carian as a possible alphabet for this document. And in this case, was the question was
that. Just explain. Carian is, if I correct me if I'm wrong, this is a variety of Greek that was spoken on the Eastern Aegean, right, in present-day Turkey.
Yes,
where Troy was the original.
It was an Anatolian language. It was an Anatolian language connected with Hittite.
Okay, right.
Hittite, and was spoken in the western coast of Anatolia, the modern Turkey. And this document, it seems to be Carian, because the letters were very strange, but I realized that this document recalls some inscription I have seen in Greek, in archaic Greek, and obviously it was a forgery, because the person has used in an absolutely chaotic way some form of the letters from this Greek inscription to to falsify this, to forge this ostrakon. No? And the case of this, the Lord Prior was very similar. I realized that all the forms there was forms taken from Vulcanius. And other were invented, no? But it is clear that this document was not did not present any new form, really, any new true or authentic Romani form, but was a forgery based on previous knowledge of the author of previous texts. No? This is typical for forgeries. Many forgeries are not ex nihilo, from nothing, but are invented from existing documents, because it is more credible for many people to recognize some forms, so noun forms. No? And this was the mystery of this Lord Prayer. I think it was a forgery, absolutely. Yes.
And what was the motivation? Why does somebody forge such a thing? I mean, I've looked at the text, the manuscript, and he's got the translations or supposed translations of the Lord's Prayer into many languages. I haven't counted them, but I'm sure you know the number. But many languages. So did he simply want to expand his collection, or why did he do the forgery, do you think?
Perhaps it was a sort of kind of horror vacui. Perhaps he was unable to find an gypsy speaker that could give a version of Lord Prayer, and the only way to fill this gap in the recopilation on forms was to invent the text. I think this is the explanation, because in other cases the forgery are economical reasons. This ostrakon, for instance, was a forgery because the author of the forgery pretended to sell this work, no? But in this case, the reason is I think it's an intellectual reason. It's not an economical reason.
Right. Well, that's fascinating. And I guess it gives us insight into what kind of things we can look out for in the history of Romani. And I suppose manuscripts are still to be discovered, right? That every few years, a new one pops up somewhere, or a new interpretation. So we're still in for more exciting times, I'm sure. Thanks, and I'll hand back to Anastasiia to conclude our conversation.
Thank you very much. It's really a fascinating conversation, full of historical details regarding Romani. I think we could call this our episode like revealing a mystery of Romani. Very interesting. Okay, and as a conclusion, we'd like to ask you, what do you think still needs to be explored in the Romani linguistics, and what would you still like to achieve in this field?
Well, for me, Romani is one of my research lines or research interests. I am a very dispersed person. I am a very chaotic person. I have too many interests, I think this is, and but in any case, I love the study of Romani, particularly Spanish Romani, Catalan Romani, these para-Romani dialects, because I think that is also a lot of things to do. Because one of the reasons that motivated me to work on these para-Romani dialects was that there was no research. The research was very scarce, and this was a new field to explore, and this was very exciting. No? And I think that we must continue with this research. In recent years, I have worked about Calon, the Brazilian para-Romani dialect, and this is very interesting. This is because it's a sort of it's like Ladino, Yiddish. This is a sort. This is a Spanish. It's a Iberian Romani, but in Brazil, no, absolutely isolated, no, with archaisms, very nice archaisms, also with some particular developments of the languages. And I think that we have a lot of things to do in the study of these dialects. And also I collaborate, and I will collaborate with Spanish and Catalan gypsies in order to defend the Romani, also the learning of Romani, of standard Romani, standard, I don't know, or other dialects of Romani, because I think that here for some, not perhaps not all, but for many Spanish gypsies, it's very important to have a language, a reference language, a language of reference, and Romani is the language of the rest of gypsy people in the world, and I think that it is important to know this language, and this is my collaboration in this last years is in order to help. My knowledge of Romani is very limited because I work on vocabulary particularly, because para Romani languages needs a good knowledge of the vocabulary, but not necessarily a good knowledge of the use, the performance of the language. But in any case, I try to help also these friends, these gypsy friends in Spain.
Thank you very much. Thank you for emphasizing and talking about this important insights. Yeah, and also we wish you a lot of success in your further work. Yeah. And some words for our spectators. Thank all of you for being with us and watching the interview. We are looking forward for your comments. Subscribe to the channel and see you next time in our new episode. Bye for now.